And I sometimes wonder, the big question, of course, about his death is people often dismiss him based on it. They say, well, if he was so wise, then how come he let a guy like Fritz take advantage of him like that? How come he didn't see it coming? And I even heard quite a well-known writer on the subject, who's somewhat of an expert, saying that well, his intellect failed him. It didn't warn him about Fritz. It didn't protect him from becoming emotionally unstable at the end of his life. And I think that that's a gross oversimplification of what was happening there, because I don't really know what happened. And I would say that I agree with Tamara that I think that there was foul play involved. It could have all been coincidental that he was separated from Marie for the first time in years, and that's when he conveniently died, something like 2 weeks after signing over all their control to Fritz, of the corporation that contained all their assets. And so I think that there was some sort of possibly at least elder abuse going on with this man. And I know that from my own experiences with Fritz, that he was trying to maintain total control over Manly Hall and got in the way of not just me, but other people who were trying to make sure that the halls were safe. But on the other hand, Fritz was providing him with something that he had never had before, which was or tons of organic food, helpers who were making life so much easier for them. They were talking about getting his work and Marie's work on the internet, which was really more of an idea at that time. But Fritz was aware of this, and he was talking about how someday satellites would be transmitting all this information, and that he would make sure that Mr. Hall's work was there
Hmm.
and it would all be heard. And he had other business involvements that he was doing, so it didn't seem like he was just there to take advantage. But I can tell you that when Tamara and I screened him, we both, we went back to Manly Hall and said, this guy is bad news. And Tamara was emphatic. I mean, she became hysterical the third time she warned him, which was the last time we ever saw Manly Hall. She actually started crying because she was like, why won't you listen to me? I'm telling you, this guy's going to hurt you. And my gut feeling is that he saw it coming. And it's not just a gut feeling, because Tamara, when she was doing research for her book, found this reference to something that he said in the minutes of a board meeting not too long before he died. And it was a reference to Fritz, and he was using a Gilbert and Sullivan musical. And there's a character called, I think it's the Lord High Executioner. And he used a quote from the Lord High Executioner in referring to Fritz. So he referred to Fritz as the Lord High Executioner.
Mm.
I mean, how do you ignore that?
Now, was Fritz, is it uncertain about whether Manly Hall was alone at the time of death or whether he was accompanied by Fritz?
He pretty much had to be with Fritz because they were in a mobile like a motor home, and they had sent Marie on. The motorhome had broken down in some way, or something had gone wrong, and they sent Marie to the place where she was supposed to be giving this lecture, and they said, we'll be here with Manly and we'll get this fixed and we'll follow. And that's when the death occurred. And Marie told us, well, no, she didn't tell us. She wrote about how she felt it, like when she thought she heard him breathing heavy, and she woke up out of this dead sleep and she felt like something was terribly wrong, and this was right when he was dying.
Right.
And so my feeling is that they separated the two of them so they could finish him off, and they were planning to have her declared incompetent, which was easy because she was always going off on her theories that sounded like madness to people who had no metaphysical training.
Hmm.
And then that would leave him in control of millions of dollars of assets, which he was already taking liberties with. He was already stealing coins, stealing stamps, and saying that he was selling them for Manly Hall, but taking cash for them.
Hmm. Now, there were circumstances around the body that were atypical, right? In terms of
Hmm.
ants and things like that.
Yeah.
Is it is it possible that there's something perhaps, I don't know if the right word, esoteric, mystical, or something like that in terms of the death process that can happen that can lead to a situation like that? Rather
Yeah,
than
I
just be
think
foul play, could there be something about, extracting the essence of the self consciously before death and something of an esoteric nature?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, certainly there are practices like that. And he was doing all kinds of weird things with Fritz, according to Sahagan's research. There were some things involving ants, apparently,
Right.
and weird kind of pseudo-alchemical experiments. And I think Manly Hall would have enjoyed that to some degree. And I was told by people that his health did improve. He lost weight, he had more energy. He seemed to be doing better with Fritz's help in some ways, but he also did become more fearful, much more isolated. I was told that at the end of his life, for example, ironically, he became afraid that a natural disaster would destroy PRS and everything that he had collected. And my feeling is that this was something that was instigated by Fritz
Mhm.
to gain more control so that when he said, I can get all this on the internet for you, it'll be on the satellites, you won't have to worry about an earthquake, that kind of thing. So I don't know what was happening there. They were doing weird esoteric practices. Now,
Right.
what I read was that these were ants that were from the area where he died that would have been on the ground. And so they thought that he had been laid on the ground long enough for ants to get into his body.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, but it's also, we've been discussing this whole time about how there were aspects to Manly Hall, some, that were, I don't know if what the right word, not quite far-sighted, but there's some different perspective on life, and some also attraction or some dynamic where synchronicities are playing out around him, and that maybe he's to some degree has some participation in these synchronicities. So, and engaging with this whole mystery of his death, my without I honestly don't spend too much time dwelling on it.
Yeah.
But it's something where my default position is sort of, there's an idea where I sort of trust that maybe there was some plan there, that there was something that he saw that he didn't want to communicate to others, or maybe even some masking of what was actually going on with him in terms of his death process, that could maybe use Fritz to mask certain things that was going on. Or, I mean, I don't want to be naive about it, but I feel like my default instance is to sort of be deferential to what, I mean, the fact that he would have you guys so close to him, but then deliberately uh not heed your advice, but not also be transparent about what his intentions were behind not heeding your advice. I think
Mhm.
it's interesting and maybe somewhat telling that there could be
Mhm.
more going on here, because nobody can really explain or have a good explanation about what his motives or incentives were in this particular case. But then we
Yeah.
look through his whole life story, and it's like, well, this is somebody who is sort of, on a different wavelength about a
Mhm.
lot of different things. So, it is definitely a curious situation, but I think I think people make way too big of a deal about it, and it does tend to cloud. And you mentioned this earlier, it does tend to cloud people's impressions of him in a way that, maybe that's part of the intent, because
Mhm.
I know in his life, he never wanted to be, and you would know this more than me, but this is just from my reading of him, is that he never wanted to be deified or made into a guru
Mhm.
type figure. and
Mhm.
and you know I almost feel like he produced the body of his work for a future time beyond his life. Like, the true payoff for his legacy of teachings was going to come at some point in the future. And so yeah, I think the death part is kind of titillating, but it is definitely a distraction, because the value of Manly Hall is in the teachings. Like, you just have to
Yeah.
listen to one lecture, really pay attention, and it's like
Mhm.
you'll know, like, the quality of person that you're dealing with here.
That's how I feel. That's why I find it so strange. I mean, the main reason I wrote The Maestro and the Boy was because I kept running into descriptions of him as a reptilian Illuminati, or just these way out kind of concepts of him as being this avatar of evil, or
Right.
a Freemasonic conspiracy. And it was so far from the person that I had known. And so I wanted to give people the opportunity to kind of see through my eyes, what a kind of wholesome, down to earth human being he was when I knew him.
Right.
And the last time we saw them was really a welfare check. They had told us from the beginning of the friendship that we could come over and visit them anytime, that we didn't even need to call, which is incredible. But we didn't ever do it. We always called them, we always set up appointments. But this one time, because of all the horror stories we were hearing, we can't see Manly Hall. He seems kind of frightened. Fritz won't let anybody talk to him. We decided, even though he had said, get out of here, we wanted to see how they were. And so we went down there unannounced, knocked on the door, and Fritz answered. He was scowling at us, and he said, you don't have an appointment, you can't come in. Fortunately, Marie heard my voice, and she said, Ron, and she said, let them in. What are you doing? So we got to go in. And we had a very pleasant conversation with them. They did not seem frightened or in any way bad. They were, especially her, were talking about the wonderful organic food they were now eating, and about how he was going to get computers and all their work was going to be spread across the world on the satellites. And they were kind of excited. But he was so creepy,
Mm.
man. He basically, I mean, Tamara described him beautifully as being like a praying mantis in the
Mm.
doorways, like eavesdropping on us, and looking nervous, like not liking that we were having this conversation. And so we thought, well, they seem okay. And when we left, um, we turned around, and Fritz was in the window looking like, I kid you not, he looked like Anthony Perkins in Psycho, okay? It was just watching us, and we just thought, oh, that guy is creepy. But, what can we do? Then the last time we saw him was, Tamara insisted. It was funny because he had been saying get out of here for something like 6 or 7 months, and I just kept working for him, and he kept giving me stuff to do. So I just thought, well, maybe I won't have to leave.
Right.
And but then she insisted on seeing him again about Fritz. She was so upset. She said, I just know that something bad's going to happen. And so I said, can we talk to you? And he said, sure, come to the office. And we came in there, and Tamara said, I keep telling you about Fritz, and he was like, you've told her I'm not interested in hearing any more about, Fritz. I've listened to what you have to say. And she lost it. She started crying. She got hysterical, and she yelled at him, he's going to hurt you. He's going to hurt you. And he just lifted up his hand, and he looked so severe, and he was just like, that's enough. I was humiliated that she had done that. She was humiliated that she had done that. He did not like those kind of displays of emotion.
Mm.
And he gave us this look that she described as, I told you kids to leave. I told, didn't you learn anything from the Zen that I tried to teach you? Why are you making this so ugly and awkward?
Mm.
And so we realized at that point that that was it, and we would not be back. And so we didn't really feel like we could go back at that point.
Mm.
And so, no, we did not reach out to her even after he died. And we didn't even hear about his death until quite a bit after it, because no one told us. And
Mm.
I found out about it from the LA Weekly newspaper.
Mm.
And I remember bringing it home, and Tamara said, what happened? Did somebody die? And I said, yeah, Manly Hall. And she said, oh, was it Fritz? And I said, yeah, it looks like it. And she was so upset. And people have asked her, why did you never talk about it? And she said, what, my greatest failure? I was hired to warn him as his screener, and I failed. and I lost my cool. I got hysterical, and then he wouldn't listen to me at all. It's my fault. I mean, she was so, kept trying to tell her, that he's a big boy. He chose his fate. He knew what he was getting into, and you did your best. But I think she still feels like she failed him
I mean,
from that
just
point
hearing
of
that,
view.
his reaction or his response and how he was so kind of dismissive, it almost seems like he has there's an explanation or there's some idea or discussion that they could have that he can't for whatever reason or won't for whatever go into. So it's like his only thing he can do is to be like, I can't talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it. You know, I'm not even going to say that I have my reasons for doing this. It's like he won't justify it at all.
Yep.
He won't
And
heed the warnings at all. It's like it
yeah,
seems like that behavioral pattern is only explainable to somebody who has a reason for doing something that can't explain it.
yeah, I think so too. And I think also that I sometimes wonder if he kind of he saw that this was kind of his last ride,
Mm,
and that he might be taking this guy out with him
hmm
because this guy had already harmed people. He had run this kind of weird dolphin birthing thing in Hawaii where someone had died, and he was a person whose impact on people was not good. And I can't imagine that Manly Hall didn't sense that from him. But at the same time, he was getting things, I think, from Fritz that were helpful for him.
hmm
Organic food, somebody to handle, parts of the business workload,
hmm
somebody to keep an eye on Marie and keep her excited and get her people to work with her and organize her work. These were all things that were helpful to him at that time in his life. And
And also,
doing
they were
these,
doing some kind of, if I remember from the biography, there were a kind of exotic medical
yes, very much
treatments.
so. All kinds of, weird involving ants and urine. I mean, just
Right.
weird.
I mean, but the context is Manly Hall's health had been in a poor state for over a decade,
Yeah, it's
and
really
he was
declining.
approaching 90 at this point, and
Exactly. And
so
he
I mean,
definitely he lost weight, he had more energy, he had more mental clarity. So some of this stuff was working, maybe just the improved diet, but it was definitely a relief in some level for them to have them there. But on the other hand, going back to that quote that I told you about, where he
right.
referred to the Gilbert and Sullivan musical, and he referred to Fritz as the High Lord Executioner. Um, it seems like he knew something was up,
hmm
that this guy had evil intent. So maybe he resigned himself to his fate, and he
I
could
mean,
see that this is.
you mentioned that in the lead up to his death, he participated in separating himself from Marie, right?
Well,
Did it?
I don't think so. I think what happened was that because they were always together. Of course, not when he was at work, but um, when they set up basically a lecture tour for Marie. I think it was like Arizona, Northern California, that kind of thing. And they rented a motor home
hmm
so that Manly could go with her and he would be comfortable. He'd have a bed to rest in and they'd be together. And for the first part of the trip, they were together throughout the trip. But when they were separated, because this uh, motorhome broke down, and Marie always suspected that it was a deliberate breakdown, they forced her to leave because she would
hmm
be late for her lecture. And she told us, not us, I'm sorry. She said in the letter that she wrote, and I was told by others who she told that she had protested that she would miss the lecture. She would stay with Manly. And Fritz told her, it's no big deal. We'll have this thing running in no time. We'll probably be there before you even start. But if wait here now, then that's going to mess it all up, and it doesn't make sense. So
hmm
they convinced her ultimately against her own will to go, and appealing to her vanity that the world needed to hear her
Right.
teaching. And he also said to her, "It's okay. I'll be okay. They'll take care of me. I'll be there in a minute." I think they really thought that they would just fix the thing and they'd be back, right,
Hmm.
together. So it's strange that they were separated. She thought that it was an intentional separation,
Hmm.
and we don't know what happened. We'll never know really what happened to him. I mean, he could have just died. I mean, he
Yeah.
was being just, I mean, I would even argue, and Tamara did, that if you put this guy in who's almost 90 and who's in failing health in a freaking motorhome and you drive him up and down these freeways, I mean, that in
Right.
itself is trying to kill him, probably.
Right. And yeah, the motive of someone who's on the precipice of death to kill somebody who's already dying doesn't make a ton of sense.
Mhm.
But then again, I didn't know the guy, and by all accounts, he was a total, shadowy, negative type of figure. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
and it
I
would
just
have
have
been
my impressions, and just looking at the aspects of the story, it just seems that there's some missing element to the death.
Yeah, I agree.
I
There's it's
fully
a
make sense of it.
strange it's all very strange. It doesn't add up very well, and such
Yeah.
a lousy job done by the coroner, and
Right.
all of it is just such a mess. And the other thing is that he I mean maybe if you want to look at the murder side of it, I'll say you've just got all this stuff signed over to you, control over millions of dollars worth of assets,
Mm-hmm.
and that can make you really greedy. And they apparently they needed the money.
Mm-hmm.
And so in his state, I mean, you stick a pillow over the guy's head. You know what I mean? I mean,
Right.
there wasn't much that he could do. So, but we'll never know.
Right.
And that's part of the tragedy of it. And it
So
is a
what
shame,
happened to
as
him
you.
afterwards? What was his fate? Fritz.
That's why I say that in a weird way, Manly Hall took him out, because what happened was he got embroiled in court cases. PRS and Fritz and his son and Marie were all cross-filing lawsuits against each other, and also criminal charges were filed against Fritz and his son. And the judge said that he thought that there was probably criminal intent, but that there was insufficient proof. But they were kept in and out of court for years. I think it was like, a year, 2 years, 3 years. I can't remember. I know the LAPD spent 5 years investigating, so maybe
Wow.
it was longer. And in that time, there was not much Fritz could accomplish because his name was in the papers as this possible killer of Manly Hall, and he and his son both became ill and died.
Hmm.
So they didn't even survive
They
long enough, I
both
don't think.
died.
They both died, he and his son.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't think they even lived long enough to see the agreement between PRS and Marie where, you know, part of the really the cream of the vault was sold to the Getty and to pay for all these legal expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So he really, I mean, whatever Fritz was, whatever happened between him and Manly Hall, it was the result of it was that Fritz was unable to pull any more hustles after that, and he didn't last
Mm-hmm.
long.
Mm. Interesting.
Hmm.